Hi, I'm Hope Brown. This is my husband, Jerry Daniels. We are the owners of a history touring company called Stone Fences Tours, and we wanted to take a little time and talk to you about some of the tours that we offer, and also some of the new tours that we have coming up into the spring and summer of this year. So we'll tell you a little bit about where we are. So we are at Camp Nelson, and this house in the background was officers' quarters for troops that were stationed here during the Civil War. This would go on at Camp Nelson to be one of the largest training facilities for United States colored troops, and then also a refugee center for ex-slaves that were trying to figure out what to do now that Civil War is going on and slavery is going to come to an end. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about ourselves. I'm a U.S. history teacher. I teach at Woodford County High School. This is my 17th year teaching. We are history geeks, always have been. My husband in particular spends a lot of time researching, planning, putting together trips. We like to learn and like to travel, and we do history tours when we travel. And one year we discovered that there's a lot of stuff to be seen in Kentucky, a lot of history here. And to our surprise, there was no one who was offering history tours. And so we just decided that was something that we would do, and we could show off the history of our state to people who are coming in to visit.
Okay, I'm Jerry. Like I said, we're both from Eastern Kentucky. We both graduated from Morehead State with political science degrees. Unlike my wife, I'm not a teacher. I didn't have the patience to do it, but we are history geeks. When we take vacation in the summer, we'll take a week and a half and we'll visit history sites. And I kind of plan those tours out, and like I said, we started looking in our own state and checking out all the places you could see. We did the Bourbon Trail. We completed the Bourbon Trail. We did the Craft Bourbon Trail. We did the Brewgrass Trail. We went to Northern Kentucky, and Mr. Jerry Gore gave us a fabulous full-day tour of the Underground Railroad. We went to Eastern Kentucky and toured the feud, the Hatfield-McCoy feud, and done a lot of research on the feuds of Eastern Kentucky. We are members of the Battlefield of Richmond Association, so we're real big into the Civil War in Kentucky. We follow that, and we do a lot of research and visit a lot of the sites that are associated with the Civil War in Kentucky. We're members of the Kentucky Civil War Roundtable, which has meetings every other month and speakers, and we enjoy it a lot. And it's actually the largest Civil War Roundtable in the country. We are also members of the Bluegrass Trust for Historic Preservation. I'm on one of the committee members for the BGT detours, as we call them. They're the first Wednesday of every month, and they're free tours of historic homes. Could be private homes, could be homes like this. And other things we're associated with is the Anderson County Historical Society. What am I missing?
We do some things with the Louisville Filson Society as well.
The Historical Society there. I was also a member of the new Lexington History Roundtable that is starting back up. And so we go to the library and hear speakers on Kentucky history, and that's just, like I said, when we say we're history geeks, we're history geeks. So we took a while to get these tours ready. We researched for 3 years. We started probably 2 years ago on kind of putting everything together, and this year, starting in April, was our first tours that we started to do, and we enjoyed it tremendously, meeting everybody out there.
All right, so we thought we would talk to you a little bit about what some of our tours are that we have to offer. We have several categories. One category that we do are history tours. And so some of the tours that we do, again, we really are interested in Civil War. So we have one that's the Civil War in Lexington. It's called Window to War. That tour is a neighborhood in Lexington that's called Gratz Park. The homes there are from that time period, and we travel around the neighborhood and talk about the people who lived in those homes, and also make the connection with Lexington during the Civil War itself. It's an interesting neighborhood where you had people that were Unionists who were also living right next door to Confederate sympathizers, and also there was a free African-American family that lived in that neighborhood. And you can see how the Grants Park was sort of a microcosm of Kentucky in the Civil War, and then the larger Civil War itself. One of the homes that we do go inside and tour is associated with John Hunt Morgan, who was considered the Thunderbolt of the Confederacy. And we love being able to take people in and showing off that house and showing off the neighborhood of Grants Park.
And that tour, we actually kind of look at it through the eyes of Frances Peter, who was a teenage daughter of Dr. Robert Peter. She had epilepsy, so she was unable to leave the house. So, I mean, she wrote a diary for 2.5 years, everything she saw. And it just gave a great narration of what was occurring in Lexington during the Civil War.
Yes.
So we looked at it from her view and what she did. So that's one of our favorite tours we do. It's only about 2 hours. Actually, you get a tour of the Hunt Morgan house, and that one is $30.
And it is a walking tour, but not physically demanding, and it's all primary source based. So it's very, very historically accurate discussion of what Lexington was like during the Civil War. Now, one of the other tours that we do is just a little bit before the Civil War. We do one called A Bluegrass Divided. Kentucky was basically territory that is border ground, and so in this in Kentucky you had people who were slave owners. You also had people here who were emancipationists who thought that slavery should end. And so we kind of highlight the history of slavery and what it meant in Kentucky by looking at it through the lens of two families. The first family was Cassius Clay, who was involved in politics, and he also did not like slavery, and he ran a newspaper that was dedicated to emancipation. We also visit the home of Junius Ward and his family that were large slave owners, but a long history with Kentucky. We visit their summer home that cost 50,000 gold dollars in 1850 to build, and it is being lovingly renovated by a private group in Scott County, Kentucky.
On that tour, we start you out at Cheapside Market to kind of talk about Cheapside Market and the slave auctions that took place there. Cheapside Market was the largest slave auction house in Kentucky. So we start there, and we have visits to Whitehall, Cassius Clay's home, and Ward Hall. That one is a half-day tour for $50, and includes all tours and price of all tours and all that.
All right, so in terms of some other history tours that we have one called The Long Century to Freedom, and that is starts right here at Camp Nelson, and it talks about African Americans from really focuses on Reconstruction till the 1960s. And we go to places that are associated with the African American community, primarily in Lexington, to see how they try to forge a place within American society once the Civil War is over.
On that we have multiple stops. Like I said, we start here. This was a large USCT training ground, so this was the place that a large amount of the slaves got their freedom. So we start here, and we visit some African American neighborhoods that were built after the Civil War for the free slaves in Lexington. We also have stops at the Isaac Murphy Memorial Garden, where we talk about the African American jockeys of the late 1800s, which is a great story. And we also visit the African American Cemetery No. 2. We also have stops at the Colored Orphanage Industrial Home, the Lyric Theater, and historic Pleasant Green Baptist Church was the site of the start of many of the modern civil rights day marches. They met there and would start their marches in the 60s. So that's a full day tour with lunch included. That's $120, and that's fees for everything plus lunch.
Also, one of our favorite tours is called the Notorious LEX. And what we do on this tour is we look at the underbelly of Lexington society. And we do this by looking at the lens through kind of scandalous or kind of taboo behavior at the time period. So on that tour, we focus on one of the most famous female Kentuckians of the time period, and her name was Belle Breezing. Now, she was internationally renowned because she ran one of the most famous bordellos or brothels within the United States. And so we talk about how her basically has a rags to riches story, how she started, how she became this very famous, wealthy woman, and then what sort of happens to her afterwards. We also talk about a political scandal that occurred where a young female actually sued a Kentucky senator in court and won. And we look at what happened with this relationship and how she was able to use power to be able to achieve this goal with this very famous senator, and a very scandalous relationship that rocked the country. The other component of that are duels that occurred within Kentucky. I'll let my husband talk to you about the duels.
In the early to late 1800s, dueling, it was illegal in Kentucky, but it was the way a guy stood up for his honor or his family's honor. So if there was something negative said about him, something negative written about him, he had to stand up. And if he didn't, it could be put in the paper that he was a coward. So dueling was big in Kentucky at that time. I mean, all the people that you could think of Henry Clay was involved in duels. Cassius Clay was involved in many duels. We talk about 3 of those duels that take place in here around Lexington. And what we actually do after we talk about the duels is that we will actually do a simulated duel and follow the actual procedures that they followed back in the day. So you will get the chance to shoot your spouse if you want to. So.
And at the end of this tour, the Notorious LEX, we go to a cocktail bar that is named in honor of Belle Breezing, and we'll drink a cocktail and sort of toast this woman who has this really rags to riches story that is fascinating, and it needs to be shared with the American public.
Yeah, this tour is it's $50. It's a half day. Includes all the sites that we take you to, and also includes the cocktail at the end. We have 2 new history tours coming up this year that we're working on. We're doing one that's Lincoln in Lexington. So we'll follow Abraham Lincoln and on his visits to Lexington, and we'll tour the sites that he would have toured back in the day. On that, we have a couple stops. We have Ashland Estate, because Henry Clay was his idol. I mean, he followed Henry Clay, and he wanted to be very similar to Henry Clay in his political beliefs. And so we'll have a tour there, and we also have a tour at the Mary Todd Lincoln House, which he visited a couple times, and so we will follow him in his visits to Lexington. That will also be a half-day tour. $50 includes fees for both houses. And finally, our last tour that we're just right now in the research of, and we still looking at sites and places that we'll go to, but it is called Kentucky Trailblazer, and it's Daniel Boone. And I know most of you know Daniel Boone, you know the name. And just following his story from the Wilderness Trail through Fort Boonesboro to all the different places he lived in Kentucky and his life, and his history. It's an amazing history, and that one will be a full day because there's just so many sites that are associated with him, which will include lunch, and that one will be priced at $100, everything included. So that's 2 new ones that we got that we're looking forward towards this year to add, because we're always looking to add, and we're always researching over the winter to add tours to our what you call it.
We want to show off the historical diversity that there is within Kentucky, and showcase what our state has to offer.
And you can see the list of these tours, and we have a little synopsis written up of all the tours on our website at www.stonefencestours.com. And we'll see you again when we start talking about our bourbon tours, which are my favorite things to talk about.
Okay, thanks.
Get it? See, that was 14